Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to my YouTube channel. So in this video, we are going to talk about hope in the darkness. So many of you all know that the Christmas season is literally just about to get started, as in Thanksgiving has already happened and we're hitting the road to Christmas. So today we're going to look at the passage of Isaiah 2 through 7. And it's all about this hope in darkness. It's about this idea that though judgment was pronounced on Israel, there is still hope. And I think that's something very interesting. No matter how many times God speaks of judgment, he always talks about hope. Hope to look forward to, even in the midst of judgment, even in the midst of trial. He talks about that. Even from the Garden of Eden, from the fall, he talks about the seed that shall come. So today we're going to be looking at the prophecy that is found in Isaiah 2 through 7. So with that being said, let's jump right in and get started. So Isaiah wrote the book of Isaiah. He was a prophet during the time of Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, and Manasseh. A lot of the style in Isaiah is prophecy, and a lot of it is poetic. Now, Isaiah 2 through 7 is not the only passage in Isaiah that talks about the Messiah. Actually, the first mention of the Messiah, one of the first mention is Isaiah 7:14. I believe that's actually the first, is the Messiah's birth. Then in Isaiah 9:6 through 7, we also hear about the Messiah's character. And then in Isaiah 11:1 through 16, we see the Messiah's kingdom. And so right before we get to the passage of Isaiah 2 through 7, we see that Israel previously heard about judgment. But now we are going to hear about hope. And so I highly suggest that you pause right now and read that passage yourself, and then I will read it again and we'll walk through this together. So now that you have read it, let's read it together verse by verse. So we'll start in verse 2. And it says, "The people who walk in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwell in a land of deep darkness, on them has light shone." So we see these two actions of the great light and the darkness. And growing up, I have always enjoyed hearing that type of analogy. The type of analogy that symbolizes light is hope, is life. And darkness is like death, depression, hardness, trials. So in the midst of hard trials, in the midst of judgment, in the midst of even death, here comes the great light, the great light. And so then in verse 3, it talks about, "You have multiplied the nation. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as they are glad when they divide the spoil." So here in verse 3, we see the reaction to the great light. And this reaction is hope. This reaction is joy. And joy to whom? Joy for all the nations. Then it kind of describes how this joy might even feel, as one who harvests after a long year of just planting and then waiting and making sure that the crops grow. Now you get to harvest. That back then, that was a wonderful time. It's like payday. It's like for us, payday has come, right? Or the idea of dividing the spoil. That is like you have won your video game or something, okay? So let's go on to verse 4 here. It says, "For the yoke of his burden and the staff for his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian." It's talking about this person of his burden, his shoulder, his oppressor. Who? Well, I believe he's talking about the Messiah here. One thing interesting that I really want to point out here is how the Messiah has broken as on the day of Midian. He has broken his oppressor. Now, if you don't know about the story of Midian, I highly suggest you read the story of Gideon, found in chapter 7. And so pretty much the short story of Gideon is that God called Gideon to defeat these Midianites with only 300 men. But here's the truth of it. Gideon didn't actually defeat the Midianite. God defeated the Midianite and just used Gideon to do so. And so we see that this victory is not really by man's victory, but it's by God's victory, just as it was on the day of Midian. And every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for the fire. I really enjoy how Isaiah is just using so much pictures. You can just picture this, right? Every boot of the trampling warrior in battle tumult, and every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for the fire. In verse 5, it kind of just talks about peace here. We have this idea of the warriors coming back from war. And then we have this idea of after they come back to war, everything that they have used, all their warrior boots, garments, everything is burned in the fire. And if you start to think about it, why did they burn that kind of stuff? Why don't they just clean it off? Well, maybe it's because that this is the end of war. Maybe it's because they realize they don't need this stuff anymore because there's no need to fight anymore. So it kind of shows this idea that war has happened, but peace has been established. For unto us a child is born, for unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. His name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end, on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness. From this time forth and forevermore, the zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. We hear a child is being born, and this child is a son. And so we kind of hear about that. So Jesus is a child, and he's a son. And we kind of see this kind of referencing Isaiah 7:14 that says, the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son. You shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. It talks about government be on his shoulder. What does that mean? You ever look at an officer, you will see ranks on his shoulder, and that shows power, that shows authority. So this idea that the government will be on his shoulder will show that he will be the ruler. He will be powerful. He has authority. And then it goes on in verse 6 and talks about he shall be called. And I think when it means he shall be called, it means that because of what he does, his character, therefore he will be called it. So it's not necessarily names, so to speak, but it's more of these are the characteristics of the Messiah. So the first one that we have here for characteristic is Wonderful Counselor. And I kind of picture this Wonderful Counselor as a guide to people's lives, their daily life. He will counsel them. And then we have Mighty God, the idea that he will possess superhuman strength and power. And then we have Everlasting Father, which don't get confused with God the Father. The Messiah is not taking the place of God the Father. Rather, it's describing his relationship with his people. He will be like a father, as in like a shepherd. I think of it more of a shepherding form. And then it describes what type of father. Everlasting, forevermore, never-ending type of father. And then we have the prince. He's the Prince of Peace. So we have prince. What type of prince? Of peace. So we have prince, which means he's royalty, and then peace, which means calmness. And so this idea is that his reign will be peaceful. And it talks about what type of government he will have. His government will be peace, and there will be no end. Now, I want to look specifically in verse 7, where it talks about of the increase of his government. Now, you're probably wondering, how can his government increase, really? Like, if his government is established forever, how does it increase? And so I thought about that. And so if you look at other translations, and you look at the Holman Christian Standard Bible, the domain will be vast, and his property will never end. Okay? So I don't think of it as, I think that says it way better and clearer, that it's not that his government increases as in it gets bigger. It just never ends. Okay, so his government will be forevermore. Okay, so that's why I really like to read other translations to kind of get a grasp of what is really happening and what is really being said, to make it a little clearer. So then we have the throne. Of whom throne is he on? He's on the throne of David. And in 2 Samuel 7:16, God reveals to Nathan that David's family will rule forever. It will never come to an end. And you're probably thinking, how can someone like that have a rule that never comes to an end? Their family never comes to an end. Well, I think the only way that can happen is if God intervenes. And he does, because it's his son from the line of David that comes and will rule forevermore. So when the Messiah comes, what is he going to do? Well, he's going to establish and uphold. But what is he going to uphold? Well, he's going to uphold righteousness and justice. And then one of the last questions is, how long? How long will this last? As we said, that the whole entire passage almost, this will be forever. It won't end. And then the last thing is, how will it be done? How will it be accomplished? Well, it will be accomplished by the Lord. He is the one who's doing all this. He's the one who's orchestrating from the very beginning to the end. He's orchestrating redemption. He's orchestrating his kingdom and establishing it. And at the end of verse 7, it says, the zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this, and will do this. Not maybe do it, but will do it. It will come to pass. There's no maybe, little confusion there. No, he will do it. So now that we have kind of read the passage, kind of dissected it and gone over it, a lot of questions that we have when we always read a passage is, so what? So what do I need to know this? Why do I need to know it? I think the first thing that we need to do when we ask that question is to find God. A lot of times, as I said several times before, when we read a passage, we don't want to see, okay, what is it about us? No, first and foremost, we find out who God is, and then we find out how we ought to respond. So what about God do we see in here? Well, I believe we see his plans do not fail. Once he establishes it, he will make it happen. We see that he brings hope. He establishes justice and righteousness. And he establishes peace as well. So justice a lot of times brings judgment, but also brings hope. Because within judgment, the wicked are cast and then it's peaceful. So that's hope. So now that we know that, how are we to respond? How should we what should we take away from this? Knowing this about God, how should we respond? Well, I think we can respond by trusting God that whatever he says, he will do. I think we also need to acknowledge that God is the only one who brings ultimate justice, and therefore we can trust him even when justice is not immediately served. Even when we see someone getting away with something, that may be temporal, but at the end, there will be justice, and there will be peace, and we can rest in that assurance. It's kind of just a summary of, I think, the biggest takeaway to take about through this season of Christmas. No matter how dark it seems to get, there's hope, and there's a reason to celebrate this season, that God has sent his son, born of a virgin, so that we can have hope in the middle of darkness. So with that being said, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I really hope this has encouraged you to just really look forward to this Christmas season. And that not because it's about stuff, but it's because through this Christmas season, it reminds us that we have hope. We have hope because the Messiah has come and he has rescued us from our bondage for those who faith in Christ and turned away from their sins. That's the hope we have. And that's the hope we have in this season, and that's the reason why we celebrate. So thank you so much for watching. As always, please subscribe, push that bell button to get notification. Comment down below because I'd love to hear from you. And I think that's about it. So I'll see you guys next time. God bless you. Bye.